Now, is there anything you would want to ask me about the production of the film? Is there anything that's ever crossed your mind going, I'd like to ask the director a few things, but...
I have a ton of things.
Oh, you have a ton of things, okay.
But I'll only ask one.
You can ask as many as you like, we have time. Okay.
Well...
You can ask, we can start with the one.
Not only I'm fascinated with the craft of acting, which is in part why I'm involved in it, but also the whole process, the behind-the-scenes process. Growing up, it was always fascinating to me to see that film, but then to think about how it came to be. And to the average layperson, they may not want to think about that or just don't think about everything that goes into getting that film to the point where the audience is watching it.
Like we were on Friday, yeah.
And you did a lot of it from beginning to end on your own. Yes, you had some help.
Sure.
But just from writing the first signal, the first world, and all of that, to all of the production that goes on to the end. I know how many stressors there were for you, and and when it's a timing thing, there's deadlines, and sometimes you're relying on other people for editing and coloring and that kind of thing.
Yep, there's a team. Yep.
But from your standpoint, where the whole thing was under your control, and you have spent so many years behind this entire thing, and the intricate detail that goes into just your writing, let alone everything else. Although there are a ton of challenges in this particular project, from beginning to end, with everything you did, even thinking about going out to the AFM in Santa Monica as many times as you did, with Dan and researching distributorship and that kind of thing. What did you find was not only the most challenging, but maybe the biggest roadblock for you to get to the point that you're at now with it?
Oh, I think the biggest challenge for a filmmaker, and I mean, Dan's behind the camera right now, but I think he can attest to this, is distribution.
Yeah.
You know, putting a film together, yes, we write the script in solitude, we take our time with it, we want to make sure it's right. We have a table read to flush out any issues or anything like that. Once we get our locations down, which was a bit of a challenge for First Signal, and getting the right cast, like with you and Connor and others, that can take some time. I mean, I set the budget, I knew what I wanted to put into it, and then once I saw it rolling, it was rolling really well. I mean, every film has its little moments, but I mean, it was rolling fine. But distribution was the biggest challenge because Dan and I had gone out to AFM. I went out the year before. I attended some of the virtual film markets this past year. And it's getting a distributor, one, that you can trust. Two, that is going to pay you. And three, that isn't going to change the name of their company after every year. Four, isn't going to give you a contract that is bigger than the one buying a house. I kid you not. I got one contract that was over 40 pages. When I bought a house, I had less pages.
Wow.
That really, and I used to be in business for myself many years ago, so I'm not unaccustomed to seeing big contracts and long drawn out negotiations. But I think what happens with people, and it's very easy to get overwhelmed because you're dealing with contracts, legalities, all this stuff, release of liability and everything. And that was like the biggest roadblock. But I had narrowed the list down to about 6. I was kind of keen with going with one of them, but didn't do as much research as Dan did. And we discovered one of them had a soft porn division.
Oh boy.
Yeah. And I never told the distributor that. I was like, you know, you want to start getting some legitimate films. I know you've got the distribution reach, but you might want to get rid of, like, you know, Debbie Does the World. So
tone it down a little bit.
Oh my God, I couldn't believe it.
Yeah.
I couldn't believe it. So finally went with a company called Indie Rights. And I had known of Linda's company for years when I made my first feature film, Justice Is Mine. And the one thing I did, and I think every filmmaker should do, is before you're going to sign a deal with any distributor, is you go onto IMDb or whatever the website you can get this information from, and you find out what films they distributed. Email some of those filmmakers. I will tell you, when I did that, there were some pretty honest answers that were coming through.
I bet.
Some even phone calls, don't sign with these people, we haven't gotten paid in 2 years. But every one of the filmmakers I talked to about Linda, they got back saying, she pays every quarter, her company's been around a long time, never an issue.
That's fantastic.
Which is great, because when the film goes to VOD, we really have to rely on their expertise to place it on this platform to start. Then you go move to this one, move to that one, then you go to home entertainment, then there's the whole foreign part of it. I mean, it really is a whole like universe of unknowns.
Yeah.
And I think that's what can get the average filmmaker just very overwhelmed. Because
it's
they get
daunting, would you say?
daunting.
Yeah.
Daunting would be a very good word. And and the nice thing about being an independent filmmaker, particularly like I own this film 100% myself. I don't even worry about a board of directors or all these investors behind me or trying to recoup $10 million. But so I didn't have to decide like today we're going to go with so and so. But sometimes some filmmakers are pushed up against the wall. They have to make a decision. And sometimes they're made quickly. Yeah. And I sadly know many filmmakers that are still waiting for their first check, because once this gets into the system and we start getting some payments out of it, then I can roll into another project.
Right.
Because you just know it's like a funnel of financing coming. Because I love what I do. I know you love what you do. But at the end of the day, everyone needs to see a little bit of money coming in. You know?
We don't necessarily do it for the money, but we have to live.
We have to live too. So that I hope I answered your question. You
did, and it brings up one more. So up to that point of distributorship, which was the goal, of course.
Absolutely.
You had total control of this whole world. Yeah. Which you started writing how many years ago? Well, First World I wrote in 2006. Yeah. And then tried desperately to get that film off the ground, but it was during the recession. Yeah. Yeah. Couple of really close calls to getting it done too, and then the recession really hit and just took independent film out. And then of course it was 2017 where came back up with the First Signal idea. Yeah, and so did you feel? I know you were comfortable with indie rights, and I did my research as well when you had announced that, and I came away with the same things you and Dan did, and so. How did you feel about, and I'm not going to say losing control of the film, you own this whole world. Sure. But relinquishing some of the control? Yeah. No, it's like you're sending a child off to school. There you go. You're sending a child off to school. Pushing the bird out of the nest. Oh, you're not only sending a child to the school down the street, you're sending it to boarding school across the country. You're not going to see in a while. Yeah. It's, I'll never forget, the hard drive was sitting on my desk. I had all the deliverables. We had the film, we had the trailer, we had the stills. I had the envelope that was going in, and my little note to Linda, I'm like, okie dokie. Here we go. Here we go. Because my first film went through an aggregator, so I never really let go of anything. Yeah, gotcha. I never had to sign a contract. This one's for 3 years. And, but I know that is one of the big things as a filmmaker you need to let go of. Yeah. Because, but like you did your research on her too, and it came back positive. I just know that she'll do the best she can, because she only makes 20%. We make 80. And the one reason why I went with her specifically, I know Dan and I talked about this at length, was some of these distributors wanted to take the film and they want to have the right to edit. Oh. Yeah. No, I don't think I mentioned that to you. I mean, Dan and I talked about this a few times. I knew you mentioned the names and maybe a change. Boy, one of them was just, they weren't going to give in on it at all. They were going to cut it down. It didn't matter. And I said, you know what? I don't care if they're offering a minimum guarantee or going to be paying for it. There is something. Dan spent hours, days, months editing this film. Yeah. And after I would send him the 2000th note, which I'm sure he's got my name on a dartboard somewhere, with the darts flying right down. Maybe, okay. But yeah, that was one of the number one reasons why I didn't sign with a few of them, because they were just insistent on it. Yeah. And we've all seen films that have been butchered by a distributor. Mm-hmm. Actually, I just watched one online the other day. I forget what was it, on Amazon. I forget what the name of the film was off the top of my head. And I knew they edited some scenes out. Now, casual observer, you're not going to know, but it takes away those little moments, those little nuances in the story, because I think First Signal is a pretty tight script. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't know where you would cut it, and in terms of you'd be losing a lot of character. That's the thing that I would think. Not only that, but just with all of the detail and all of the information within the story. Because everything links to something else. Exactly. And if you take one link out, the whole chain can collapse. Because I was an actor on an independent film many years ago,
where someone told the director that they had to have the film at 90 minutes for distribution, which is total bunk. And he cut it down to 90 minutes. And the issue was that the film was probably about, I think, the same length as First Signal, but an hour 42. Cut sections where suddenly the characters not only didn't make any sense, but there was no, you as an audience member would never get really invested in them.
Yeah.
And the main character himself did not have a lot of lines to begin with, just the way the film was. So you take any lines away from him and he was just looking at the camera like that. So, you know, it just, whatever. But that was the number one reason why we went with Linda, and her reputation as well. Yeah.
And so, one last question.
Yeah.
Can we talk a little bit about the sequel?
Yes, the sequel, First Launch,
Yes.
has been written. It is much larger in scope,
Yes.
which means we hope a lot of people watch this film, so we receive lots of royalties. It takes place 2 years after the events in First Signal. And General Reager has now got full operational global control over Operation Troy. It is other militaries that are involved now. The president is finding herself at an absolute crossroads on the eve of the presidential election, which is being strongly influenced by Russia. So we took some historical fact from 2016. She ultimately loses the election. So Cedric and his group are facing being rounded up, being put into what could just be called camps. It's a global film at this point. It reaches globally.
Yeah.
So the production budget would be set accordingly. That being said, I think it presents a very exciting continuation of the story till we get to First World, because I actually have 6 parts for this whole story. And I'd be very excited to get this off the ground sometime next year or the year after.
So to that point, and with our audience that has seen First Signal or hopefully will, that wants more afterwards, when do you foresee starting production of First Launch?
Well, if we can get the production budget that I want, it'd take about 6 months, 7, to ramp up pre-production. Casting, locations, and some of them would have to be built. We need to know.
Say again?
Some of them would have to be actually built.
Okay.
We need an Oval Office, by example.
Yep.
There'd be some interior areas of the Pentagon that you would just probably would have to build. There's some bunker-like scenes in it, but not too big. But the special effects are rather involved.
Okay.
We actually see some interesting installations that Cedric operates out of. That are they'd be very special effect heavy.
Oh, I
for
bet
sure.
they'd have to be.
Yeah, and I could see production itself taking several months, actual physical production on it. So my hope is that would start to coalesce next year, in 2022. But it would take a bit of time. I mean, I could see in a perfect world, 2023, 24, it comes out. But I think if First Signal gets the right public relations hits and media hits we want, the whole idea is to propel that forward.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think this is a good start.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And thank you again, Paul, for the great work you did on First Signal.
Well, thank you.
It's when you put the uniform on and walked on set, you were General John Reager. And I mean, I can just say this, and I'm just not saying this just because you're sitting in front of me and because we filmed it. I mean, when I watched the film on Friday at the world premiere, you came across as a 4-star general. There was nothing. There was no hint of acting, nothing.
Thank
and
you.
that just as a testament to how you prepared for the role.
Thank you.
And I did not know about that background at Otis and all that, and father
Yeah.
and everything. So thank you.
Thank
again
you
for coming in.
Love being a part of it. Love working with all of you, and congratulations, Mark. I mean,
Thank
it's a great film. Yeah.